Hi there, F-150 owners. Today in your 2020 F-150, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Timbren's rear suspension enhancement system. Before we install our suspension enhancements, we want to get just a couple of baseline measurements so we can see how our factory suspension was supporting weight versus our new suspension is going to support the weight. So first we're going to start unloaded, just get a quick idea of how our ride height is. We're at about 40 inches here in the rear. And we're at about 37 3/4 in the front. So we're going to go ahead and load it down, recheck those measurements. So now we've got our suspension loaded up. We're going to recheck our measurements once again. And looking like we're at about 36 inches here at the rear. Recheck our front. And we're at about 39 inches up here. So we've raised our front up by about 1.25 inches, and our back has dropped down nearly 4 inches. So we're going to put our suspension enhancements on, and then we'll recheck them and see the difference that it's made over our factory suspension. And we're at about 37.5, so we've only dropped down 1.5 inches now versus the nearly 4 that we've dropped down before. And then we'll recheck our front. And we're at about 38 inches here in the front, so we're only lifting up about 1/4 inch, which is a whole inch less than our factory ride height. While we're fully loaded up, we're also going to go ahead and hit our test course just so we can feel the improvements that our Timbrens have over the factory suspension. We're going to start with our uneven bumps course, which is going to simulate like hitting a pothole. And we can feel it here. It's definitely a little bit stiffer, but it's still actually a pretty smooth ride. I was kind of expecting the Timbrens to make it a little bit more stiff in the back than it is, that you're really going to feel like a boom, but it's actually pretty smooth, and it takes away a lot of the bounce, and we just feel like we're riding much better with these. Next, we're going to be going to the even bump section, and that's going to simulate going over a speed bump or maybe pulling in and out of a driveway. And this is fairly similar with the uneven bumps course. The rear suspension, it's taken the weight better than it did before. We don't have nearly as much oscillation, and I'm not seeing nearly as much hood here because we're not so loaded down there in the back. But it's still surprisingly smooth. Timbrens, I have noticed on some vehicles, it does make the suspension stiffer than I would like when driving around loaded up. But this actually feels really darn good. Last, we're going to be going into the slalom section. And this is where we're going to simulate an evasive maneuver. Now, we do have some extreme cold weather here today, so I'm not going to be taking it quite as aggressive as I normally would due to that. But I do expect there to be quite a bit of an improvement here on how it's felt so far. I do really like how natural it feels with them in there. The Timbrens experience on some of them has just been, it's kind of abrupt and boom, but wow, it is actually very nice on this truck. So we'll get her rocking back and forth here. And it takes the weight very well. It definitely made a big improvement here in as far as like slalom going back and forth. We had a lot more sway without the Timbrens in this. This is probably mainly because with all this weight in here, our Timbrens are engaged right now, so we're getting the benefits always, versus that factory suspension had us at such of an angle, we weren't really getting hardly anything from those. So it does feel really good. I would definitely have more confidence with a fully loaded up truck here like this if we did have a situation where we needed to get out of the way of something. And this is what our Timbrens look like when they're installed. They are a replacement for your factory Jounce bumper, which we have here. And it's going to decrease the distance that your Jounce bumper has from the frame to the axle, which is going to give you quicker engagement of the new Timbren Jounce bumper over your factory one. And what that means is you're going to have support from your Timbren system much sooner than you would from your factory Jounce bumper. Your factory Jounce bumper isn't really designed to provide a lot of support. It's really just there for when your suspension has reached the end of its travel to give it a point that has a nice soft contact where it does have a little compression, but it's mainly just to prevent metal on metal contact. Whereas this one is designed to compress to provide assistance for your suspension as you're going down the road. What that's going to do is it's going to help bear some of the weight that your suspension was. It doesn't increase the amount of carrying capacity your vehicle has. It does just help support some of that weight, which takes some of the load off your suspension, help increasing the life of your suspension. And it also helps your truck ride more like it would if it wasn't loaded down so heavy. Because as you load down the back of your truck, it pushes that down and it lifts up on the front of your truck. That changes the geometry of the suspension of your tires, which causes you to have decreased handling performance. This is due to less surface area contact on the road of your tires. By having a Jounce bumper like this back here, it decreases how much the back of your vehicle is loaded down when you put weight on it because you've got this extra support. That's going to put your suspension back to closer to where it needs to be, restoring some of that lost handling performance. It also affects your braking performance as well, because as you have a lot of weight in the back, it's not transferring properly onto your front brakes where most of the braking is done. So by helping to level this back out, we're distributing that weight more properly as well to restore that braking performance. The last thing it does that a lot of people don't realize is that when the back of your truck is loaded down and the front's lifted up, your headlights are pointed up towards the sky, which reduces your visibility at night. Helping to level that back down does bring those lights back down so you can see once again. Another thing that we talked about is that's just for the end of suspension travel here, really is just for this Jounce bumper. We can see that we've got plates here at the top as well as a striker plate here on the bottom. So we're also decreasing our suspension travel just a little bit so it'll never sag as much as it did before, even when it's fully loaded up to the max. We'll begin our installation underneath the vehicle by removing the Jounce bumpers located on each side. This is your Jounce bumper here, and it's just above the rear axle, and it's yellow in color. There's a 13mm bolt inside that holds it in place. We're working on a lift here, so by working on a lift, the axle's hanging, which increases the gap between the axle and the Jounce bumper, which makes it easier to get our tool in there. If you're working on this at home in your driveway, I recommend chalking your front wheels, and then you can use your floor jack underneath your hitch to lift up on the back of the vehicle. That'll help increase this gap for you so you can get in there. It is important that the front wheels are chalked, though, because your rear wheels are what holds your vehicle in place, and if you're on any kind of incline or decline, the truck could potentially move if you lift those off the ground. So we're just going to go up in here, break this guy loose, and then zip it out of there. They can be in there kind of tough. They usually put a little bit of Loctite on them, so you might have to work at it a little bit, but it will come off there. Now that we've got this removed, we'll go ahead and take the one off on the other side the same way. We can now put our upper brackets in place. These are going to be side specific. You can see here this one's labeled left, so it's going to be for our driver's side. So we're going to put that one up first. The ears here are going to face towards the inside of the frame, so it's going to be just like this. The hole here in the top is what we're going to feed our bolt through. This is the shortest bolt in the kit, and I did slide on one of the lock washers that comes in the kit. Just slide that in, line up the bolt with the hole where our Jounce bumper used to be, and then just thread that right into place. Be careful not to pinch any lines on the other side. They're up high enough where they shouldn't be in the way, but just double check. We don't want to damage any of the existing components. And then we'll tighten it down using a 17mm socket or wrench. There is an opening here at the bottom you can get a swivel socket into, but you can also just go into the side with a wrench. Once we got this side tightened down, we'll mount the other bracket on the other side in the same location. Next, we're going to be putting the actual Timbren spring up onto the upper bracket. This is our Timbren spring here. There's a washer inside that is pre-installed in there, so you will have to get that in the right location so it lines up with the hole. And then you're going to have two different length bolts left that come in your kit. You're going to have your shorter one here and your longer one. These are going to vary depending upon whether or not you put the spacer block in. If you use the spacer block, you'll use the longer bolt. The spacer block will sit between the top of the Jounce bumper here and the bracket that we just put into place. Now, we're not going to be using these if you have just a regular F-150 like this, you're driving around town. If you have the spacer block in, you're going to have constant contact between your new Timbren and your axle. That's going to give you a pretty rough ride if you're unloaded just cruising around town. So we're going to omit this for just regular use. This is just going to upgrade our suspension so that way when we do load up our truck, we've got that extra support that we need when it's loaded up. This is going to really be for larger trucks. It's not really for our F-150. If If you've got something that's larger, that's more for heavy-duty, medium-duty applications, you'd want to put the spacer in to have that constant contact. Really the only thing I would suggest with your F-150 with using this is if you do keep it loaded down all the time. Maybe you've got a pull-behind camper or something that you're always bringing with this. You really never use it for anything else. You might want to put that spacer plate in there then for those always loaded up situations. So I've gone ahead and taken my bolt and dropped it down through there. Since we're not going to be using the spacer plate, we chose the shorter bolt. Once you've got it dropped through and pulled through like that, we're going to take our socket. It's going to be a 17 millimeter. We're going to put it on there, and that way it'll hold it through there. We can then use our socket with an extension on it to line it up with our upper bracket and then thread it into place. We can then go back and tighten it down, and then we'll put the one on the other side the same way. We'll now put our lower brackets in place. Here we have our lower ones here. These aren't side specific. If you look, there's little notches cut out in them. Those are to sit in between our U-bolts for our leaf springs there. And it'll set right on top of our axle. We'll have clamps that also come included. These are going to slide over the bottom. We'll then take the included flat washers, place one of those on, and then we'll follow that up with a nylon locking nut. We'll do the same thing over on the other side. The black powder coating that's placed on these can make it a little difficult sometimes to get the nuts to start. Just kind of got to work it a little bit until the threads start on there. It kind of just makes them a little tougher. But there we go. We'll now use a 9/16 socket to snug these down. And I like to go back and forth to make sure it tightens down evenly. We can then torque these to the specifications found in our instructions. And we'll repeat for the other side. Now that we've got all these fully torqued down and installed on each side, our installation's complete. We're ready to load up our trailer and hit the road. And that completes our installation of Timbren's rear suspension enhancement system on our 2020 Ford F-150.